Welcome to another edition of Dolphins In Depth podcast provided to you by the Miami Herald. I'm your host, Omar Kelly, Dolphins columnist. And joining me now is my cohort, Barry Jackson, the man of many expertise. As you all know, Barry's worked for the Herald for nearly 3 decades. Have we made it through 3 decades, Barry?
4 decades. We're 38 years and counting.
4 decades. We can't count the fourth until we get to 40, Barry.
Okay.
So when is your 40th anniversary?
It will be in 2026.
2026. Yeah. Okay.
And we'll have a big party at the Dolphins headquarters following their win in Super Bowl 60. Will it be something like that?
So something like that. Barry, we always have a very interesting perspective to rookie camp because it's clearly not an eventful practice participation. I always love when Joe Termino blows his whistle and the rookies have no idea which field that they're going to. That's one of my favorite things, and they have to be directed what to do. But what were some? We talked to a lot of the rookies, we talked to all the draft picks, and we talked to selected undrafted players. What were some of your standout impressions from our introduction to this rookie crop?
I would say, Omar, just the earnest joy that you see in rookies putting on an NFL uniform for the first time. Patrick Paul, the Houston left tackle, the second-round pick, said, "I feel like I'm in a dream right now, putting on an NFL jersey." We had similar sentiments expressed by several players. I thought it was interesting also that Mo Kamara, who was refreshingly blunt and brash during his media session on April 27th, saying he was going to tear through the whole NFL, a more humble Mo Kamara today said, "Look, guys, I haven't even made the team yet. So if you're looking for me to repeat some of the brashness that I expressed on April 27th, that's not going to happen." So he's very self-confident, but we didn't hear a repeat of sort of the eyebrow-raising things he said about how he's going to make all the teams pay who passed on him. Now, One guy who continued to be brash was a guy that you wrote about today, Jaylen Wright, I should say, the running back out of Tennessee, who the Dolphins acquired at 120 when they traded up with Philadelphia into the fourth round. He repeated today that he's going to make teams pay for not picking him. And I would think if there's anyone in this rookie class who's likely to do it in year one, it's probably him. Because as we both know, you can plug running backs in and get high productivity right away. Exhibit A being Devon Achane last year. What did you take away from looking at Jaylen Wright physically and from his session with us?
Jaylen Wright, since you're bringing up Jaylen Wright specifically, and I did write about him in a Miami Dolphins column, I was impressed at how thick he was. 5'10", listed at 210 pounds. He doesn't come across as a scat back, even though his yards per carry average and speed would let you think that this is a guy of small stature. No, he's got a little bit of size to him. I think he could benefit from being in an NFL program, kind of get a little bit of that baby fat off him. And to be honest with you, I think there were two guys that were ultra impressive to me when I'm talking about just putting the eyeball test. And that's really where I see the value in these rookie camps. You get to get an up close and personal look at these draft picks. You see what they are in their film. You see what they are when in their size and ratio and metrics and weight. But when you give them the eyeball test, it is a difference. And the two guys that really stood out to me were the offensive tackles, Patrick Paul and Byron Mathis. I think I said it right.
Yeah, he towers over everybody at 6'7". And our session with him, we should tell folks, what a delightful young man. He came here to the U.S. from the Dominican Republic at age 17, and we can briefly tell his story that he initially played college basketball at New Mexico for 2 years, then played 1 year of basketball at USF in Tampa. And then his host family in Chattanooga, Tennessee said, "Look, you shouldn't be playing basketball. You should be playing football." So he walked on at USF. He got a couple dozen snaps defensively as a defensive lineman in games against Howard and BYU, and then was switched to the offensive line. Never got in any game action, but I think it was meaningful that he received a strong endorsement from Scott Pioli, the former Chiefs GM, the former Falcons assistant GM, now with NFL Network, who raved about his skill set, his growth, while watching him at IMG Academy in Bradenton. And there were a dozen teams that made offers to him. The Dolphins offered him $247,000 guaranteed, which is enormous for an undrafted rookie. And he said one of the reasons he came here today or over the past couple of weeks was because he knows he's going to be developed here. Then he talked about obviously liking Miami and the weather. And what did he say about Butch Barry that made us laugh today?
I was still stunned. I couldn't even remember what he said about Butch Barry. You have to tell the people.
I love that boy. Was his comment about Butch Barry. So he's very enthused by Butch Barry, who, by the way, his enthusiasm is really infectious, Butch Barry's. So I could see Butch Barry appealing to any developmental project. It's all one large run-on sentence with Butch Barry, but it's delivered in a high-octane,
Yeah.
high-enthusiasm way where you could see him firing up any developmental prospect and anyone who meets with Butch Barry thinking to himself, okay, this guy's going to develop me. He's caffeinated all the time. He knows how to coach. He's good with technique. So I think Butch Barry has emerged into something of a recruiting weapon, if you will, to get offensive linemen because of his personality and because of the fact that even
Barry,
though
O-line coaches always have personality.
Yes, but this guy developed players last year. Now, you could say it's to his quick release. It was a big reason for the low sack numbers. You can say that his college coaching career was kind of uneven. It wasn't a great year that he had at UM, but I think he's gained a measure of respect in the last year from helping develop Austin Jackson and other players on this line, where I think now he is an asset on this staff, and I can see that appealing to young offensive linemen. Now, obviously, if the Dolphins had not offered $247,000, he would have perfectly enjoyed the climate in Minneapolis or Buffalo
Green
or
Bay,
whoever the hell else was offering him a job, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Green Bay or Appleton. Here's the thing, and I did notice about the two offensive linemen, Patrick Paul and Mathis. They're long, 6'7", 331 pounds for Paul, 313 for Mathis, and they've got long wingspans. Now, they seemingly can move well. The question is, can they be athletic for this wide zone scheme? I don't think you need your athletes to turn the corners on pulls, but you do definitely need them to get to the second level. Certainly, you bring up the point that Mathis is a international player, so he's eligible for that international exception. Can you explain to people what that truly means?
So what that means is the Dolphins can keep him as a 17th player on the practice squad. They're not limited to 16 players like most other teams. The Dolphins had the same exemption with Durval Carez-Nito, who was an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman during his 3 seasons here. All he ever received ultimately was a few snaps in preseason, never played in a regular season game. So that one didn't work out. Perhaps there's more upside with Matos, but I wouldn't think that there's any expectation of him playing this season. This is a guy you invest a year or two in, see if it ultimately leads to anything. To me, with the offensive linemen brought in today, the 12 who are under contract, to me, the Ohio State guard is the most intriguing to be played. I should bless Omar. Bless you, Omar.
Thank you. Matthew Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Because he played for a high-level program at Ohio State. He was an effective guard for them. He's got positional versatility, can play some center. So this is the type of guy you could see if he impresses. It's still a long shot to make the roster, but you could see a pathway maybe where he gets there with injuries. So he, to me, is a guy worth developing. The UTEP center was the best pass blocking center in the country last year, if you believe the Pro Football Focus metrics.
Meyer. Yep.
Exactly. And he was snapping the ball to his college quarterback, Gavin Hardison, today. So the two developed offensive linemen in Meyer and Matthew Jones from UTEP and Ohio State, to me, those are the ones worth watching in the months to come. Matos is more of a developmental project that's fun to keep an eye on, but not with any expectation of him helping you this year. Anybody else offensively stand out to you? There are only 6 of them who were signed as undrafted rookies. The FAU receiver, who's super fast.
Yes.
The quarterback from UTEP, I think, is highly unlikely to unseat Skylar Thompson. He had a 77 NFL passer rating in college. He does have a very strong arm. His numbers were not great at UTEP. Completion percentage in the mid-50s. And his biggest strength, Omar, is arm strength. And he admitted today that that has been a little bit diminished, at least temporarily, by Tommy John elbow surgery that he had in November. The same surgeon from the Texas Rangers who performed that procedure on Brock Purdy. So he was out there throwing today, but he said his arm strength is not back to where it was. The question is, does he show them enough to stick around into the first week of August. And highest possible ceiling would be maybe he gets into 1 or 2 preseason games and legitimately challenges Skylar Thompson. That to me would be a surprise, but he does have a 4-year body of work and he does have an arm. So that gives him at least something of a chance.
I don't even look. I don't even look at him as a possibility to unseat Skylar Thompson. Just from the mastery of the offense. Now, who knows? You never know what can happen. And I want to bring up the point to you because you talked about Matthew Jones having probably a realistic shot of making the 53-man roster. The way the Dolphins have operated, probably since Devon Best in 2008. At least one undrafted player that comes out of nowhere will make the 53-man roster like a Julian Hill does or a Nick Needham does or a Kader Kohu does and find themselves having a prominent role. So you could honestly, and I'm writing a column about this for the Miami Herald, you could look at any of these names. Who would have thought a year ago at this time in rookie camp, Julian Hill would have unseated a drafted tight end and to earn a spot on the Dolphins roster and play nearly 400 snaps on offense? I don't think anybody would. So to each and every one of these rookies, best of luck to you. You keep what you kill. To quote the, I don't know if you watch a Pitch Black and the Necromonger, I forget what movie it is, series it is, but it's basically you go out there, if you kill it, you keep it, and it's your job. Defensively, I will tell you what really caught my eye. And obviously, the 2 pass rushers are the top guys that everybody needs to be paying attention to in Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara. He prefers to be called Mo than Muhammad. Does not want you to mess up his name. There is a size disparity between both of those guys. Kamara is a little bit stout. He says he plays with leverage. That's important. And leverage is indeed important. To me, the biggest issue when I've ever dealt with pass rushers, edge setters, whatever you want to call them, they're called technically edges. Can you set the edge? Because if you cannot set the edge, then teams will pick on you in terms of where they're going to run the ball. And you will become a liability. And any team that cannot stop the run is a defense that's getting gassed. To me, one question, and I think the only question I asked Chop Robinson is something that had lingered with me throughout the draft process. I always try to find out as much information on these rookies as I possibly can. And the one thing that is missing from Chop Robinson's amazing athleticism that makes the world stop and take notice, that has him securely locked into being a first-round pick, is the fact that he did not bench press 225 pounds. Now, I know during his career at Penn State, he has some amazing 400-pound, power clear bench press metric that shows he's definitely strong. And without a doubt, there's no concern about him being strong enough to play in the NFL. Now, my question is, can you push off a 330-pound offensive tackle in Austin Jackson, a Kendall Lamb, a Teron Armstead? There's no chance you can push off Teron Armstead. But can you push off and set the edge and contain the perimeter of a defense? Hell, can you do it against a tackle that's not named Mike Gesicki? And I asked him, why did you not bench press at any point, either the pro day or the NFL combine? I mean, his pro day or the NFL combine. And he said it was just a personal choice. And to me, that sends off kind of a red flag-ish indicator. And I'm sure the Dolphins have done their homework. They know what his strength numbers are from the Penn State strength and conditioning coaches, because that's what their job is. They get all of that necessary information and they're able to produce the reports. But if we don't have a baseline of how strong and functionally strong you are, it's kind of hard for me to understand where it is that your strengths and weaknesses are. And when I looked at him, the Dolphins had an individual named Aaron Lynch, a 7-year veteran from the University of South Florida. He's played for the San Francisco 49ers. He played for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the last time he was in the league was during the COVID year, but hell, he had the connections in order to get a tryout here with the Dolphins. Now, mind you, Aaron Lynch is 6'5", listed here at 260 pounds, and this is just a tryout guy. He has been a traditional defensive end inside the NFL that has obviously lost a little weight and is trying to convert to the outside linebacker spot. Does not move well because I watched him in practice. It's a little clunky. I would be shocked that the Dolphins signed him. But what I did notice is that he towers over Chop Robinson. And to me, in this defense, you need Emmanuel Ogbah-esque edge setters. You need guys with the physical stature of at least Jaylen Phillips, Bradley Chubb. And that's not necessarily an area that Chop Robinson has in his bag or in his arsenal. Now,
yeah, I had 2 points on Chop Robinson. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break your train of thought.
No. Go
couple
ahead.
Things on Chop Robinson. 2 things concern me. Totally agree with everything you're saying. I would say, as far as stopping the run, one thing that would concern me, and we can all acknowledge how athletic he is and the high ceiling, everyone would agree on that. One thing that would concern me is 15 tackles over the course of the Big Ten season. I know he didn't play in every game. That would worry me, just because at some point, even though you see the upside, you see the QB pressures, 15 total tackles was a number that kind of sticks out. The other thing is, and this is the argument that NFL executives and coaches can have for years, there's no right answer. Do you value quarterback pressures more, or do you value sacks more? Obviously, everyone's going to hold the sack numbers against Chop Robinson. 4 last year, 2 of them against UMass, but 3rd best pass rush win rate in college football last year. I did the math, Omar, and he had clearly a superior pressure per pass rush snap rate than Dallas Turner, who ended up going as the 2nd edge player in this draft behind Latu from UCLA, but was considered the number 1 edge player in this draft going into the draft. As far as Latu is concerned, Chop Robinson's pass pressure per pass rush snap was very comparable to Latu. So much better than Dallas Turner's, comparable to Latu's. The question is, can he convert more of these into sacks? So that, combined with the excellent point you just made about, is he big enough, imposing enough physically to stop the run? Those are 2 big concerns. And ideally, when you pick someone in the 1st round, you don't want 2 major concerns. It'd be okay if you had 1. The 2 is what made me a little uncomfortable with the pick. Now, obviously, he could turn out to be a terrific player, but these are 2 significant questions lingering over this draft selection. And I know then people will say, okay, then what would you have done? I don't know, maybe Graham Barton. I know Darius Robinson wasn't a great scheme fit, as you pointed out here. Newton, the Illinois defensive tackle, ended up going much later, but you always had the option to trade down. So to me, this is one of the most fascinating Chris Grier picks in quite some time, because there is such a boom or bust potential. Have they hit on another Danielle Hunter, which would be the absolute pie in the sky scenario, or have they given us Charles Harris? Not to say his skill set's similar to Charles Harris. I think he's got a higher ceiling than Charles Harris coming out of college, less productivity, higher ceiling. But to me, this could go either way. What does your hunch tell you about 4 years from now? We are saying Chop Robinson is what? A competent NFL rotation player, something better, something worse?
To me, the way I look at it is, I follow certain old school philosophies and fundamental concepts. And if you cannot set the edge, you cannot play in the NFL now, unless you're going to just be a 3rd down pass rushing specialist. And that's cool. There's no shame in that. Players have made very productive, solid NFL careers as pass rushing specialists. And I think you could put him in another number of situations, and his quick get off and get ability to create seams inside offensive lines and squeeze into gaps. I think that there's value in that. But to me, if Chop Robinson does fail, it's going to be because he can't set the edge. And keep in mind, there are 6'5", 280-pound defensive linemen that cannot set the edge. And I think one of the biggest gripes that Vic Fangio had about Emmanuel Ogbah last year was the fact that despite his stature and size, he wasn't that great of an edge setter. So I'm not going to say that it's an instant recipe for failure, instant recipe for success. We won't really know until they put the pads on. But I will say, if he does not succeed, it's going to be because of the edge setting issue. And I just wish I had some bench press numbers. Hopefully one day a Dolphins executive will walk by me and tell me how many times he could bench press 225 pounds. But as a trainer once told me, if you're trying to bench press 225 pounds as a regular human being, you're making a mistake. So maybe it's just not something that will lead to success health-wise. And maybe he just had a shoulder issue or an elbow issue. We don't know in the process. But another thing that found very interesting, Barry, about the 2024 draft picks is how Mo Kamara continuously says that he trained with Chop Robinson and they became adversaries, competitors, and it fueled him. And he basically said, Chop Robinson is an elite athlete, and I absolutely understand why he's a first-round pick. But I want to continue to work to show that I'm not an inferior player. And despite being a fifth round selection, does that intrigue you, inspire you, concern you, Barry?
I love it. I love the fact that Mo Kamara has a chip on his shoulder the size of anything you would find in any Haagen-Dazs ice cream with chocolate chips in it. And to me, that's an impressive quality. I know some people could feel like, well, maybe the boastfulness, the bashfulness isn't necessarily ideal. That doesn't bother me at all. I love how he challenges players he works out with. I love how he challenges himself. To me, the only question with Mo Kamara is, as we talked about, the size at 6'1". Is he going to be stout enough? He talked today about how he's used his size as an advantage with leverage. We'll see if that conveys to the NFL level. But I'm incredibly intrigued by Mo Kamara. The hope is that either he or Chop Robinson can set the edge well enough while Jaylen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are on the mend, where the Dolphins can trust them playing opposite Shaq Barrett early in the season. Now, when Jaylen Phillips said during UM spring game to Andrea Adelson on ESPN that he's going to be ready for the season, I think everyone took that to mean he's going to be ready for week one. That remains to be seen. I guess there's obviously is a chance that if he's not ready for week one, then we might be in a scenario where Chubb also obviously would be sidelined off the Achilles. And then who are your starting edge players? Shaq Barrett will be one. Cam Good's not going to be ready after the patellar injury. So then you're looking at either Chop Robinson or Kamara can either be trusted off the bat, setting the edge, as you said, to be reliable against the run. That's why you could make the case at some point in June to sign one more edge player. I know there's still names out there. Bud Dupree's been touring with teams, not with Miami to this point. There are other guys that you can get just to protect yourself if you go through August having concerns about the health of Phillips and Chubb and not having quite the confidence that you're going to be able to get solid play against the run from the two draft picks. There's another edge player, too, in camp, Grayson Murphy from UCLA. He's got the distinction of having the most quarterback pressures in his career, 273, of any player in this draft. Any defensive player in this draft. I asked him today, did he know that? He said he didn't know it, but he said pass rush is my number one asset. And he said I landed in the right place. So the latest player with UCLA experience to be here as an edge rusher, Jaylen Phillips, obviously, who he knows. He was telling us he met Jaylen Phillips when the Dolphins were in Los Angeles to train or to practice during the weeks between the 49ers and Chargers game about 15, 16 months ago. Mitchell Agudi was another former UCLA player, VUM, who we thought might have a chance last year, ultimately did not. Yeah. So we'll see if Grayson has more potential. As far as the other defensive players here today, Omar, I would say Storm Duck is someone to keep an eye on. The former NC State and Louisville corner didn't have great metrics last year, passer rating against high 90s, low 100s, but his metrics were better earlier in his career when he played for NC State before a year at Louisville. And he said today, when I asked him, did the development of Needham and Kohu affect your decision to sign here when he had more than a half dozen offers? He said, absolutely. He said he has seen that they've developed defensive backs here, and he'd be the developmental project this year that they hope will follow in the footsteps of Needham and Kohu and become a serviceable player. By the way, one quick thing on Needham. He is, as we've written, as we saw with the photo, he is working a lot at safety. Looks like he's going to end up there. The Dolphins have not definitively told him the corner is out from what I've been told, but the indications are that he is probably going to be a safety pending any more roster decisions. That's where he's been working primarily to this point. Do you like, and we'll get back to the rookies in a second, but I was curious if you like the Needham safety idea.
I think it's important to have him cross-train. I think he is a very versatile player. He's intelligent enough to master every concept. Right now, if you're going to put him on a game day roster, you're probably put him in as that dime cornerback. And maybe you can have Cam Smith elevate himself into a more prominent role. I think Needham's role moving forward is to be the backup nickel cornerback, dime starter, and probably the number 4 safety behind Elijah Campbell and the 2 starters in Javon Holland. Now, the question is, what happens if one of those guys goes down? And also, can you develop another nickel cornerback? Because this is really a scheme where, okay, if it's not Caterco, who you know struggled mightily in his second season, then it's going to have to be Nick Needham. Okay, if Nick Needham is needed at safety, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Ethan Bonner? Is it going to be Cam Smith? Or are you going to move Jalen Ramsey inside to nickel, which I think is a horrible idea? Or will one of these young players step up? The one thing I did find very interesting about the Dolphins rookie camp depth chart is that they have Isaiah Johnson, who is listed at 6'3", 205 pounds. They have the Syracuse product pegged as a cornerback instead of a safety. And I heard that he can pretty much play both, has played both. So maybe, even though 6'3" is a big nickel, maybe that's something that they envision there, that they want to develop him in the nickel spot. But they have Storm Duck, who looks the part. I'll be honest with you. The rookie camp is about me putting my eyeballs on guys and sizing them up. And, I think it got a little bit crazy in the media room because I tweeted out about Patrick McMorris's calves, because he's got big calves, and calves are one of the things I look at, Barry. And when people who are natural athletes, they have massive calves. That's just the reality of life. I am not that athletic. I do not have good calves at all. So Patrick McMorris, and I talked to him a little bit, and he's basically had a career of being a special teams contributor, playing on every special teams unit. That looks like what is probably going to be his primary role if he makes the 53-man roster. And obviously, more can be put on his plate if he comes out in training camp and becomes a playmaker. Very humble kid, very California-esque. I don't know if you get what I mean by that. So he's got that Matt Morris style of personality and approach. So it'll be interesting. One thing I do notice about a lot of these young rookies, they've got good personalities, which makes me think that, it's going to be a good fit inside this locker room, which has a lot of unique personalities. And obviously I think you have to have sort of a unique personality to stand out on this team.
I agree. 2 points. One is Mark Perry, the TCU safety, someone to keep an eye on. He was well regarded, had a lot of interest after the draft. Also, with McMorris, the hope is not that he becomes a footnote in Dolphins history as the guy who thought the Dolphins telling him he was going to be drafted was a spam call and hung up. If that's what we know McMorris for, the California safety, that the late round pick a year from now, then that'll be unfortunate. But he has a decent chance to stick as a 6th rounder, as a special teams player. On the personality point you just brought up, I'm glad you raised that. What a delightful group of young men. Patrick Paul, you couldn't meet a more friendly, gregarious, effervescent guy as Patrick Paul. We talked about Kamara, about Jaylen Wright's personality. This is an interesting group of young men, and not all of them came for 30 visits, but I think the Dolphins had a very good feel for the personalities they're getting. There doesn't look to be any malcontents. All just said, they wanted to contribute and do what's asked of them, as rookies should say. So I like this group from that standpoint. I think the funny takeaway from this draft class is how evaluators are more optimistic about what they got on day 3.
Yeah.
Some are, than what they did on day 1 and day 2. And that's not to dismiss or besmirch Chop Robinson or Patrick Paul. They're just natural questions about each player and whether they can become effective NFL starters. While in contrast, people look at Jaylen Wright and say, this is going to be a quality NFL running back. Maybe it's going to be someone who you just use on third downs or selectively as opposed to starter. But I think there's consensus on this. And there's also consensus that Malik Washington, even though he might never be an NFL starter or a star, there's a consensus that as a 6th round pick, he has as good a chance to have a career, a sustained career, as anyone you could take in the 6th round. And with Kamara in the 5th round, you just cannot ignore the high productivity at Colorado State. So it's funny that the Dolphins' 3rd day of this draft ended, I think, up affecting the perception of this draft might have tilted a little bit negatively off the first and second round picks, but I think the Dolphins draft was viewed positively in part because of the third day picks.
Yeah, I think the third day picks kind of saved this draft for them just because they got a lot of high rated players at value selections. Now, the question is, can they become immediate impact players? Can they become year one rookie contributors? And I think that's TBA, to be determined. So obviously, let's hope that everybody stays healthy and nobody's forced into the lineup based on injuries. And if that is what happens, c'est la vie. What will be will be. And hopefully there are some young players who will step up. Because remember, Devon Achane was the number 4 running back on this team before he got in there with the Denver game. And I don't think there's a media member who would have been banging the table and saying that, oh, he deserved more carries or more opportunities and was ready for stardom. But when he got out there, he maximized his opportunity and made the best of it. So best of luck to all the rookies. Stay out of trouble. Don't get caught up in South Beach. And certainly keep your eye on the football and focus on football and don't get lost into the rookie haze of living in South Florida. So on that note, it was an honor to be with you again, Barry. We will continue to be doing Dolphins in Depth next week. We will address some of our thoughts, perceptions, and takeaways from the offensive and defensive depth chart. On that note, we are out.